Hello and welcome back to another notes video. In this notes video, we are talking about the cell cycle and mitosis. Mitosis is the process by which one cell becomes two. We've learned earlier in Unit 2 when we were talking about cells that cells come from other cells. Mitosis is the process by which that happens. DNA is found in the nucleus of cells. DNA is responsible for carrying our genetic code, and it's also used for making proteins. DNA is wrapped up in very condensed, tight bundles called chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes in their body, or 23 pairs. As a pair, they're often drawn as an X, like you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the image on your screen. When cells divide, they need to make sure that the new cells have the same amount of DNA as the original cells. But why do cells divide? Well, you need new cells often. Here are 3 reasons you might need new cells. 1, if it's asexual reproduction, like the way certain organisms reproduce or our skin cells reproduce. Another reason why you might need new cells is for growth. As you get bigger and you get older, you grow longer hair, you need more cells. Or maybe you've damaged some cells, like you got a cut on your hand. Your body will need to make new cells, both blood cells and skin cells, to repair the cut. How do cells divide? Cells go through a process called the cell cycle. The cell cycle has several phases. Interphase, then there's mitosis, which is composed of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, and at the very end, there's cytokinesis. The reason I have this image of the cell cycle in our notes is because I want you to notice that most of the time, in fact 95% of the time, the cell's life is spent in interphase. The actual process of division, or mitosis, takes a very short amount of time, only 5% of the cell's life. How I remember the phases of the cell cycle is actually a funny little rhythm. So, Miss Shelton did something really embarrassing. I peed myself at Target checkout. No, not really, but this is how I remember the phases in order. Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. I peed myself at Target checkout. That's how I remember the phases. If that helps you remember them, feel free to use that acronym. So that first phase, I, interphase. The cell goes through the first step of interphase, which is where the cell spends most of its life. The reason it takes so long in interphase is because this is where it's making a copy of DNA. We learned last unit about DNA replication. Well, that's what's happening here. DNA is replicating. You need to make a copy of DNA because during mitosis, the cell is going to divide. So during mitosis, one parent cell becomes 2 daughter cells, and the number of chromosomes in the daughter cell has to match the parent. It's for this reason that you start off with 2, you multiply by 2, and then you divide by 2 when the cell divides. That way, you double the DNA and have the DNA, so you end up with the same amount of DNA. Do the math. If I multiply by 2 during interphase, 2 times 2 is 4, and then I divide by 2 during mitosis, 4 divided by 2 is 2. You end with 2, and you started with 2. Humans have 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs, in their body cells. Your body cells are different from your sex cells. After mitosis, their new body cells will also have 46 chromosomes. For example, a glass frog only has 26 chromosomes. How many chromosomes would you find in their cells after mitosis? If you answered 26, you'd be correct. You end with the same number of DNA or chromosomes as you started with. So, mitosis consists of several phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then it kind of ends with cytokinesis. These different phases are the cell pulling apart. Let's start with prophase. During prophase, the cell is preparing to divide. How it's preparing is by the nuclear membrane, or the thing that holds the nucleus together, starts to dissolve, which means soon the chromosomes will be released out into the cytoplasm of the cell. Now that the chromosomes are released from the nucleus, they will line up in the middle of the cell. We call this metaphase. When they line up in the middle, they are lined up by these strings called spindle fibers. The spindle fibers are now going to engage in kind of a tug of war. So they're pulling on those chromosomes that are lined up in the middle. During anaphase, those chromosomes are pulled apart by those ropes in the tug of war. Anaphase, apart. The chromosomes are split in half. Half goes towards one side of the cell and half goes towards the other side of the cell. As they are falling apart from one another, the cell will start to divide in two. Telophase looks like two stuck together. Chromosomes will reach the opposite end of their cell. However, they're not fully separated yet. As you can see, they're still stuck together. Cytokinesis is when the cells fully divide. During cytokinesis, the cell membrane will start to form to separate the two sides of the cell. In a plant cell, we call this a cell plate. So the line that begins to separate the two cells is a cell plate. I remember this by thinking cell plants belong on my plate. Animal cells, on the other hand, where their cell membrane starts to reform, it's not called a cell plate. It's actually called a cleavage furrow. I have a bit of a naughty trick that'll help you remember this. If you take a look at that middle image underneath the animal cell label, what does it look like? Yes, I know what you're thinking, and yeah, that is what I'm referring to. It does look like a pair of breasts. Well, what do you call the area that's in between a pair of breasts? You call it a cleavage. This is what it's called in animal cells. The area that's starting to separate the two cells from one another is called the cleavage furrow. Here's what it looks like in real life. A is showing a cleavage furrow of an animal cell. B is showing the cell plate of a plant cell. So, think of ways that you might be able to remember the phases of mitosis. I'm going to remind you of my trick. I peed myself at Target checkout. Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis.